Welcome to Children of the Rift, a science fiction journey into the silence of forgotten stars and the echoes of ancient blood. This is not just a tale of war and survival. It is a story of guilt, redemption, and the mysterious bond between a battle-worn man and 5 children who were never meant to exist. In the far reaches of space, on a world long abandoned by maps and memory, a storm is brewing. A rift has opened. From it, secrets return, secrets that could either heal a galaxy or tear it apart again. So find a quiet moment. Let the noise of the world fade, and prepare to enter Dryad 6, where every whisper may be a memory, and every silence a choice. Now let's begin. The wind on Dryad 6 didn't howl. It whispered, through fractured steel frames and rusted antennae, past hollowed mining shafts and the silent bones of an outpost long abandoned by war and time. Harven Strade stood still in the doorway of a shelter, a half-collapsed atmospheric dome reinforced with hand-welded plating. One hand rested on the hilt of his talon-edge blade. The other gripped a rusted mug of synth brew that had long since gone cold. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in 7 years. The last broadcast from the coalition of Terran defense had cut out with a static pulse, nothing more than a coded disbandment order buried inside a weather report. Harven hadn't cared much. The war was over. Or maybe it wasn't. No one ever said the silence meant peace. Dryad 6 had once been a refueling station for CTD forward units during the Lorithari campaign. Now it was nothing but ash dunes and cracked rock, circling a star too dim to name. For Harven, that was enough. Enough to be forgotten. Enough to forget. Each morning, he walked the same circuit, 13 clicks across the Virion Belt's outer ridge, past the shattered remains of an old pulse relay tower, back through what used to be a supply depot carved in a cliff. He didn't carry the talon edge for protection. Not anymore. It was a weight he couldn't leave behind. Like the faces of the Lorithari, he couldn't unsee. Inside his shelter, makeshift solar coils buzzed faintly. Dust clung to everything. Tools, walls, even the glass casing of a half-functioning pulse relic he never figured out how to turn off. At night, it would flicker with a soft cyan glow, like it remembered something he didn't. Harven spent most evenings staring at the stars beyond the cracked dome. Sometimes he thought he saw movement. Not ships, just shadows. He'd tell himself it was the wind playing tricks again, refracting light off the rift-line horizon. But a part of him knew. Places like Dryad 6 didn't stay forgotten forever. He kept a journal. Just lines scratched into old ration wrappers, stashed in a crate under his bunk. Notes about weather patterns, seismic shifts, and sometimes dreams. The dreams came more often now. Strange symbols. Whispers in a language he never learned. A voice, not quite human, calling from across a boundary he couldn't define. That morning, he'd written one line before his pen dried out. They're coming. I don't know who, but I feel it in my bones. He chuckled as he tossed the wrapper into the heater. Maybe he was going mad. Or maybe, after all these years, the silence was finally cracking. Outside, the horizon pulsed faintly. He looked up. Not the sun, not the wind, something else. And then, he felt it. Not heard, not seen, just a shift in the air, like the planet had taken a breath. Harven was halfway through repairing the weather panel when the sky tore open. It started as a low tremor beneath the bedrock of Dryad 6, too deep for standard tectonic activity. He paused, spanner in hand, eyes narrowing as dust drifted off the shelter's beams like disturbed memory. Then came the sound. Not thunder. Not an explosion, a sound without a name, like the atmosphere itself had been sliced, its edges ringing with pressure too unnatural to belong here. He stepped outside, squinting into the horizon where the rift line shimmered faintly in the haze of midday light. And then he saw it. A bloom of violet gold light erupted across the sky, not above the planet, but within it. Space itself folded, contorted, and cracked open like a blooming wound. Harven's instincts kicked in. He ducked behind the old or hauler's wreckage as something broke through the rift, a pulse of energy followed by a streaking object plummeting toward the northern ridge. Impact came seconds later. The shockwave swept across the Virion Belt, toppling loose scaffolding and sending clouds of ash spinning into the air. Harven felt it in his chest, deep, primal, like the planet itself had exhaled something it had been holding in for too long. He stood slowly, eyes locked on the rising pillar of smoke and color where the object had landed. No ship I know makes a drop like that, he muttered, voice dry. He considered ignoring it, turning back inside. letting the universe play its next move without him. But the air still shimmered where the rift had torn open, and his old instincts, the ones he'd buried under years of silence, whispered something else. Something important had arrived. Grabbing his talon edge and throwing on his field pack, Harven moved fast across the ridge, boots sinking in a fine black dust. The descent to the crater site was sharp, carved with fresh scorches and crystallized sand. As he approached the outer rim, he spotted broken stone slabs scattered like shattered bones. The ground was still warm. Then he saw it. Not wreckage, not debris. A pod. Sleek, organic, made of materials he couldn't identify, but felt ancient. He edged closer, heart steady but alert. The pod was cracked open, steam rising from its edges. There were no lights, no control panels, just a hollow interior barely large enough to hold. Harven froze. There were footprints in the dust. Small, bare, and not just one set. The prints led away from the pod in a tight arc, as if their owners had circled the impact site before scattering. Harven knelt beside the nearest imprint, brushing away loose dust with the back of his gloved hand. The depth, spacing, and pressure were unmistakable. Children, young ones, and barefoot. He followed the trail cautiously, talon edge drawn, but held low, more out of habit than aggression. The tracks wound through jagged stone ridges and into the remains of an old Lorathari excavation site, one of many abandoned during the war. It had once been a staging ground for mining alien ruins. Now it was a cemetery of rust and silence. Half-collapsed scaffolding groaned overhead as Harven moved through the clearing. He scanned the area, sensors from his visor flickering with age and static. Then something shifted in the corner of his vision. Movement. He turned sharply, but there was nothing. Another flicker, this time behind the twisted remains of a comms tower. A faint breath, then stillness again. Harven lowered his stance, voice steady but firm. I'm not here to hurt you. No answer. I saw the pod. I saw where you landed. You're not supposed to be here. Neither am I, but we're both still breathing, and that's a start. Still nothing. Then one by one they emerged. 5 figures. Small, thin, clothed in ragged fabric that shimmered faintly like woven light. Their skin wasn't uniform. Each bore a different hue, ranging from soft blue to muted violet, but their features, unmistakably human. Almost. The one at the front, a girl with silver-threaded hair and deep-set eyes, stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 10. Harven's hand tightened instinctively on his blade, but he didn't raise it. What struck him first wasn't fear. It was the silence. They didn't speak, not a single word, but they looked at him, not with the wild eyes of children lost in chaos, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition, like they'd been waiting for him. Harven felt his chest tighten. The old scars on his back, reminders of the Lorathari War, itched beneath the armor. How long have you been out here? He asked softly, scanning their faces. No response. Only the silver-haired girl tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something just behind his voice. Then he saw it. Along their necks, barely visible beneath the collarbones, were bioluminescent ridges pulsing with soft rhythm. Not implants. Not tech. Organic. Alien. Lorathari. Harven stepped back, cold shock running through his limbs. He had killed beings with those marks before. Hundreds. And now, here they were. Children. Alive. Watching him with eyes that looked too ancient to belong to bodies so small. He didn't lower his weapon, but he didn't lift it either. Not yet. They didn't blink. 5 pairs of eyes fixed on Harven as if peering straight through him. Beyond the cracked armor, the weathered skin, the years of ash and guilt he wore like second skin. The silence between them wasn't empty. It pressed against him, dense and humming, like standing at the edge of some invisible current pulling at his thoughts. The silver-haired girl hadn't moved. Neither had the others. One of the boys, smaller, with a faint line of golden markings along his jaw, tilted his head, mirroring Harven's own defensive stance. Not threatening, not afraid, just studying him, as though comparing him to something remembered, something expected. Harven cleared his throat, voice softer now. You seen me before? No reply, not even a nod. You know who I am? The silver-haired girl blinked once. Then slowly, deliberately, she raised one hand and placed it flat against her chest, fingers spread wide. Not a salute, not a plea. A symbol? The others mimicked her, synchronously, as if following choreography hardwired into them. Harven's mind reeled. He had seen something like this during the war, deep in a Lorathari temple just before it was leveled by orbital fire. A gesture carved into the walls, encoded in artifacts. A greeting? A warning? A memory? He wasn't sure. He took a step closer. The children didn't move. "You're Riftborn, aren't you?" he asked, half to himself. "That's what they used to call you." Whispered legends, told like nightmares to soldiers with too much blood on their hands. The silver-haired girl blinked again. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Just a faint breath, like the memory of a voice. Suddenly, Harven felt dizzy. His vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from something else. A presence brushing past his thoughts. Foreign but gentle, like someone lightly tapping the edge of his mind. He stumbled back, shaking his head. What are you?" The smallest girl, barely old enough to walk, eyes like polished amber, reached toward him with both hands. Harven flinched, but she only touched the fabric of his sleeve. Briefly, softly, and then she smiled. Not with innocence, not with joy, but with relief. Like she'd finally found something she'd been missing. Or someone. Harven didn't speak as he led the children back toward his shelter. They followed in absolute silence, moving like mist between the broken stones of Dryad Six's ruins. No protest, no hesitation. As if they had always known the path, even before it existed. The wind picked up near the ridge, carrying fine ash across their tracks. Harven glanced over his shoulder every few steps, checking for signs of fatigue, resistance, fear. But the children moved with eerie coordination. Not military, but instinctual. Like a pack. It was only once they reached the edge of the outpost that he hesitated. He looked back at them, eyes lingering on the girl with silver-threaded hair. "This isn't a safe place," he muttered, almost to himself. "But I don't suppose anywhere else is safer." The girl didn't answer, but she stepped forward and placed her palm lightly on the doorframe of his shelter. Fingers splayed, matching the gesture she'd made earlier. It was subtle, but Harven felt it. The metal warmed beneath her touch. He exhaled slowly and keyed in the old manual override. The door groaned open, releasing a breath of stale air and recycled heat. He waved them in. Inside, the dome was dim and cluttered. Spare tools, aging gear, patched walls of foil and ceramic. Not a home, just a place to not die. But the children filed in without complaint. One curled quietly on a makeshift cot. Another knelt beside the heater, watching the soft blue flame flicker like it held a secret. The smallest climbed into a corner and fell asleep almost instantly, fingers still curled around Harven's frayed sleeve. He stood there, unmoving, for what felt like hours. Then a sharp tone cracked through the silence. Beep, beep, click, click. Old, broken, but unmistakable. The perimeter motion alert. Harven crossed the dome in 2 strides and activated the interface. The monitor flickered to life, colors bleeding across the screen in fractured waves. After a moment, it locked into a grainy external feed, static, black shapes, a thin red square blinking over movement detected near the crash site. Harven's breath caught. Not local fauna, not environmental drift. Someone was already here, and they'd seen it. The warning lights flickered red above Harven's console, their glow pulsing like a slow heartbeat. He leaned in, brows furrowed, watching as the perimeter sensors streamed corrupted data across the cracked screen. There was again, intermittent pings, faint signatures flaring and vanishing like ghosts. But they weren't ghosts. They were scouts. Autonomous reconnaissance drones, CTD designation, Echo Division Class 6, optimized for biological sweep. Harven hadn't seen their kind in years, not since the border conflicts along the Caroan Expanse. But he knew their sound, even before the radar confirmed it. A shrill hum sliced through the sky above the outpost. He rushed to kill the lights in the dome. With practiced speed, he threw a thermal blanket over the pulse relic and ushered the children deeper into the shadows of the shelter. The silver-haired girl, Kira, didn't speak, but her wide eyes locked onto his with a calm intensity that unnerved him more than panic ever could. Outside, something passed overhead, fast, deliberate scanning. Harven crouched low, peering through a narrow slit in the reinforced hatch. The drone was a dark blur against the amber sky, trailing thin lines of scanning light across the surface. It wasn't just mapping terrain. It was sniffing for something. Genetic markers. He remembered the project name now. Phase markers. Experimental tech developed by Echo Division, used to track Lorthari remnants during the final purge. Once a drone picked up a signature, even a residual, it wouldn't stop until the source was found and tagged. And Harven had 5 of them under his roof. He pulled up the old jammer module, buried beneath a panel of worn floor plating. The emitter was rusted, long overdue for replacement. He hadn't tested it in years. This better still talk dirty to satellites, he muttered, powering it up. A low hum filled the room, masking all electromagnetic signatures in a 10-meter radius. Not enough to fool a full tactical sweep, but maybe enough to delay the drones long enough for an exit plan. Behind him, Sitha clutched the edge of the cot, watching the screen with unblinking eyes. His fingertips glowed, faintly, subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking. Harven saw it, and he realized something terrifying. The drones weren't just picking up the pod's residue. They were reacting to the kids, actively. Outside, another drone joined the first, then a third. The swarm had begun. Harven didn't speak. He simply grabbed his talon edge, slung the emergency pack over one shoulder, and looked at the children. They were already standing, waiting. Harven didn't wait for the perimeter breach to sound. He knew the drones wouldn't give him that courtesy. He moved fast, sweeping the shelter with military precision. Emergency satchel, power cells, compressed water rations, talon edge sheathed but within reach. Every movement rehearsed, reflexive. Years of muscle memory hadn't faded. They'd just grown quieter, waiting in the dark corners of his bones. The children were silent but alert, standing like statues in the dome center. Kira stepped forward, her eyes flicking to the sealed hatch as if she already knew what came next. Harven paused long enough to study her expression. No fear, no confusion. Just readiness. Follow me, he said. No talking. No hesitation. Mirren reached out for the youngest, Luma, pulling her close without a word. The group fell in line behind Harven like they'd trained for this moment their whole lives. He keyed open the rear hatch. The outside air struck them with a bite, dry, acrid, heavy with the distant scent of scorched rock. The dusklight was already fading. Good. The dark would help. They moved fast across the ridge, skirting the edge of the ruined or transport lot. Harven knew every inch of this terrain. It had once been a war zone. Now, it was just his backyard. But even he couldn't predict where the drones would sweep next. Not with Echo Division algorithms running their patrols. A sudden pulse swept over them, silent, invisible but felt in the skin. Luma winced. Tobin stumbled. Harven halted and glanced upward. A drone passed high above, scanning beams, slicing across the rocks like searchlights from Forgotten Era. Stay low, Harven ordered, guiding them into a collapsed maintenance shaft. They crouched behind fractured steel beams and coils of ancient wiring. The kids huddled silently, their breaths shallow. Harven peeked through a shattered vent. The drone paused above the shelter they'd just left. Then it dropped. A sharp, controlled explosion echoed as the dome erupted in fire and dust. The shockwave rolled through the terrain, rattling Harven's ribs. He clenched his jaw. There goes Plan A, he muttered. Kira crawled to his side, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Not from fear, but something else. Awareness. They weren't just scanning, he said, mostly to himself. They were tracking heat, electromagnetic signatures, maybe even resonance patterns. He trailed off, gaze sharpening. Or maybe they're tracking you. The girl didn't flinch. She only tilted her head and said nothing. Harven exhaled, pulled back from the vent. We head for the southern ravine. There's an old comms relay there. Might still have access to deep cave tunnels. Sitha raised a finger, pointing toward the jagged ridgeline. Harven followed the gesture. Atop the cliff, silhouetted against the fading light, stood a figure, tall, armored, motionless. Not a drone. Something else. Watching. Then it turned and vanished into the dusk. Harven's gut twisted. They were being hunted, and the hunt had only just begun. The terrain changed as they pushed deeper into the ravine. The air grew colder, thinner. The ash that blanketed Dryad Six's open plains gave way to layers of fractured stone and metallic dust, remnants of an old mining corridor long buried by rock slides and time. Harven moved ahead, sweeping with a low-powered sensor baton, watching for seismic instability or thermal traps left over from the war. The kids followed without complaint, but Harven could see it. They were tiring. Luma had started to lag, and even Sitha's quiet alertness had dulled. Mirren whispered softly to her, rhythmic words in a language Harven didn't understand. It sounded almost like a lullaby. Then Kira stopped walking. She stood in the middle of the narrow path, body stiff, face turned upward. Harven paused and turned back to her. Kira, he said, keeping his voice low. We don't have time to. Her eyes were wide, glowing. Not bioluminescent like before, but brighter, pulsing, like starlight compressed behind her pupils. Harven stepped toward her. What is it? She raised one hand slowly, pointing at the ridge above them. And then the air fractured. Harven didn't see it. He felt it first. A vibration, not in his ears, but somewhere deeper. A kind of internal ringing, as if something vast had shifted nearby, but not yet arrived. The world around him stuttered, just slightly, like a skipped frame in a broken hollow reel. The kids gasped. Up ahead, a rockslide triggered. No cause, no tremor. It simply fell. But Kira had already turned her head seconds before it happened. Harven's heart pounded. You saw that coming. She didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes. And, for a moment, just a breath, everything around them slowed. Ash hung longer in the air. The wind softened into molasses. The light above dimmed to a deep amber stillness. And it snapped back. Kira opened her eyes, took a sharp inhale, and dropped to her knees. Harven rushed to her, catching her before she collapsed. What the hell did you do? I felt them, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Echoes. From the seconds ahead. Just ripples. She looked up at him, dazed. They're close. 2 drones, less than a minute away. One above, one behind. Harven didn't question it. He barked, move, and herded the others toward a narrow chute in the canyon wall. He'd used it once during a supply run to escape a meteor burst. It was barely a fissure, but just wide enough for them to squeeze through. As they slipped into the darkness, Harven glanced back toward the ridge where Kira had pointed earlier. The drone passed by, exactly when she'd said it would. And for the first time in years, Harven felt something deeper than fear. Wonder. The chute led them into a collapsed tunnel. Dark, narrow, the ceiling barely intact. Harven crouched as he moved, brushing aside thick strands of fibrous moss that had no right growing this deep underground. It smelled faintly of ozone and metal, like blood left too long on a blade. The children stayed close, whisper quiet behind him. And still, Harven couldn't shake the image of Kira, her eyes glowing like starlight, her voice trembling with visions of seconds yet to come. He'd seen miracles during the war. He'd seen horrors too, but what she had done wasn't either. It was something older, woven into the bones of this planet, into her, and it pulled him backward, into memory. The first time he saw the Lorithari was on Vexus Prime, decades ago. They didn't look like monsters. That was the part that had haunted him the most. They had eyes like Earth children, too wide, too soft. They bled like humans too. Not red, but deep violet. Thicker. Slower. The CTD had sent his unit in with full clearance. Operation Hollow Sunday. They were told the Lorithari were terraforming the moons illegally. That they carried mutagenic spores. That they posed an existential threat. Harven had believed every word. He remembered breaching the temple dome. Glyphs glowing along the walls. Wind singing through crystal columns. The Lorithari had not resisted. They'd stood together, a circle of elders and children, palms open, fingers splayed in that same gesture he'd now seen from Kira and the others. It hadn't mattered. Orders were orders. He remembered pulling the trigger. Not once. Dozens of times. The arc rifle buzzed in his hands, searing flesh from bone. Ancient song turning into screams. And when it was over, only one glyph remained lit, above the altar. A spiral. Simple. Elegant. Harven had stared at it for hours after. When his men celebrated the purge, he'd gone outside and vomited in the dust. Now, as his boots scraped the stone of Dryad 6, that same spiral returned, etched faintly into the tunnel wall, half buried under grime. It glowed faintly as he passed, like it remembered him. He stopped. One hand pressed the stone. Behind him, the children watched. Kira stepped closer, her expression unreadable. You were there, she said, not accusingly. Not with anger. Just fact. Harven's jaw tensed. How would you know that? She didn't answer. But Mirren whispered something to Sitha in their strange, melodic tone. Sitha turned to Harven, blinking slowly. We remember the end, he said softly. Some of us were there. Harven felt the ground tilt beneath him. He looked at them, not just as refugees or lost children, but as echoes. Carriers of memories, not their own. Fragments of a culture he had helped erase. And now, here they were. Not seeking revenge. Not even seeking justice. Just surviving. Harven's grip tightened on the talon edge strapped across his back. The hilt felt heavier than usual. The past, he realized, wasn't behind him. It was walking beside him. The tunnel narrowed until it came to a dead end. Slabs of rock collapsed inward, tangled with rusted support beams and remnants of old mining tech. Harven scanned the blockage with his handheld unit, but the signal bounced erratically. No clear path forward. We'll have to backtrack, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. But then Mirren stepped past him, quiet and deliberate. She approached the wall of stone, fingers brushing along the surface as if she were reading it. Harven started to speak, to stop her, but something about the look in her eyes froze his voice in his throat. It was the same look he'd seen in soldiers reading maps drawn in blood. Determined. Certain. She knelt slowly and, with a single finger, began tracing a symbol into the dusty stone. Harven recognized the shape instantly. The spiral. The same glyph from the temple. From the tunnel wall minutes earlier. From the nightmares that had haunted him since Vex's prime. Mirren's hand moved with grace and certainty, as though she wasn't remembering the shape but reliving it. As she completed the last curve, the spiral glowed, soft and blue at first, then deepening into violet. The ground trembled. Harven instinctively reached for the children, pulling them back. The wall cracked. Not explosively, but like stone giving way to memory. Dust spilled from above as the slab split down the middle, revealing a passageway carved with ancient precision. Behind it lay a staircase descending into darkness. Cool air drifting up, tinged with the scent of metal and something older. Something sacred. The children said nothing. Harven stared at the opening, 1,000 questions crashing inside him like waves against a cliff. But Kira placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. This was always here, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was waiting. Harven swallowed hard. Waiting for who? The girl met his eyes. For us. And with that, she led the way down into the unknown. The staircase spiraled deeper than Harven expected, carved not with tools, but seemingly grown into the rock, each step smoothed by time and something stranger. Bioluminescent moss trailed the walls, pulsing gently in shades of violet and blue, casting soft reflections across the children's faces as they descended in silence. At the base, the passage opened into a wide chamber, cold and still, the air heavy with the scent of metal, dust, and something ancient that stirred beneath the surface of perception. Glyphs lined the walls, Lorathari script, unmistakable even after all these years. Harven had seen them before, burned into temple stone on distant moons. But here, untouched, they glowed softly, as if aware of his presence. Kira stepped forward and laid her hand against one of the symbols. It pulsed in response, and from the far side of the chamber, a panel slid open with a hiss of escaping air. Harven raised his talon edge slightly, more out of habit than caution, and stepped inside. It was a data room, though not in the way CTD understood data. Instead of servers and holograms, there were rows of crystalline pillars, each one humming with faint light. Between them, strands of some silken energy webbed like veins in glass. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, low, circular, with an orb resting in a cradle of stone. Harven approached and hesitated. The orb looked inert, its surface cloudy and still. Then Mirren walked past him, calm as if guided by memory. She knelt, placed both palms on the stone pedestal, and whispered something low and melodic in the Lorathari tongue. The orb flared to life. Light danced across the ceiling, forming spirals, constellations, fragments of history, images not words. Harven stood frozen as the story unfolded in a sequence of soundless illusions. He saw Lorathari cities grown from living crystal, suspended over oceans that shimmered with reflective sky. He saw them commune through light and resonance, not language, exchanging entire emotions, entire philosophies, in single pulses of color. And then, he saw the end. Terran warships descending through their atmosphere. Fire. Collapse. Glyphs burning beneath orbital strikes. Elders shielding children with their bodies. And the final scene. 5 figures, tiny and glowing, placed into an organic pod, sealed beneath a rift that pulsed like a living heartbeat. Harven stumbled backward. The children had gathered around him, faces illuminated by the memories of their ancestors. They weren't enemies, Harven muttered, voice hollow. They were never soldiers. Kira stepped beside him. They were guardians, she said. We were their last message. Harven looked back at the orb, which now pulsed with steady light. Its knowledge transferred, its purpose fulfilled. And for the first time since the war, he realized how little he'd ever truly understood. They didn't cry. That's what struck Harven first. No wide-eyed confusion. No trembling lips or desperate clinging. Just a quiet, still reverence as the children stood around the orb, bathed in its pulsing light. Like they'd seen it all before. Because maybe they had. Mirren was the first to kneel. Her fingers touched the floor, trailing across the ancient grooves etched into the stone. Glyphs that had long faded to near invisibility. As her hands moved, she began to hum. A low, melodic sound. At first, it seemed meaningless. But then Kira joined in. Then Sitha. Their tones wove together, different but harmonious, forming a chord that vibrated in Harven's chest. It wasn't just music. It was memory. Harven staggered back a step, breath caught in his throat as a wave of pressure filled the chamber. Not from the orb, but from them. From the Riftborn. Kira's eyes glowed faintly, tears forming but never falling. Her voice whispered, soft but sure. I remember a hand, calloused, strong. My father. He carved our names into the stone walls of the nursery before the sky fell. Said our light would echo. That it wouldn't die. Tovin clutched his stomach, eyes clenched. I remember fire. The smell of burning crystal. I couldn't scream. I didn't have a voice then. My mother held me. She didn't run. She sang. Sitha touched the wall, where a broken spiral had faded to nothing. I died here. Not my body. My first life. When the ships came, we ran to the caverns. I remember the silence after the last beacon stopped pulsing. I remember choosing to sleep. Luma, small and silent, reached for Harven's hand. Her fingers wrapped around his scarred knuckles with more weight than a child should carry. I remember her, she whispered, looking at the orb. She was gentle. She told me I might wake up one day in a world that wasn't ours. That someone would be kind. Harven couldn't speak. The guilt that had lingered like a shadow behind his every breath now pressed down like a mountain. These weren't just alien children. They were living testaments. Fragments of the people he had helped destroy. I didn't know, he muttered. We were told you were weapons. That your kind was a threat. Kira looked at him, not with anger, but with something far worse. Pity. We weren't meant to fight, she said. We were meant to remember. That was our design. The Lorathari gave us their last gift. Not revenge. Not power. Just memory. Harven turned away, staring at the far wall, where faded carvings looked back like hollow eyes. He had spent a lifetime running from the past. Now it stood before him, calling him by name. The chamber dimmed after the last memory faded, the orb's glow settling into a slow, resting pulse. The children grew quiet, exhaustion etched into their faces, though not from physical strain. It was the weight of remembrance, of lives once lived and lost. Harven paced the edge of the chamber, trying to ground himself. He needed air, distance, logic. But instinct kept tugging at him, the same gut-level alertness that had saved his life 100 times over. Something was off. He tapped the side of his scanner. The ancient structure made readings difficult. Interference from the crystal walls, from the residual energy of the orb. But beneath the noise, a pattern emerged. A signal, repeating. Ping, ping, ping. Short range. Tight band. Coded. Military. Harven froze. No natural formation would emit that signature. Not unless it had been planted. He adjusted the frequency, narrowed the scan radius, and ran a sweep across the children, trying not to let panic show in his face. For readings, normal. Low resonance. Minor fluctuations. Nothing alarming. The fifth flared. Tovin. Harven turned slowly, eyes narrowing. The boy stood by the chamber wall, tracing his finger along a faded glyph. His expression was distant. Calm. Oblivious. Harven approached. Tovin, he said gently. Do you feel anything strange? Tovin blinked. Strange. Harven crouched. Any pain? Pressure? Heat. The boy looked down at his chest. Here, he said, tapping just above his heart. It feels like a beat that isn't mine. Harven didn't respond. He reached into his gear, pulling a dermal scanner and waving it across the boy's chest. The display lit up instantly. A foreign object, small and embedded just beneath the skin. A phase marker. Harven swore under his breath. The tag was old but still active. Likely dormant since the child's incubation, designed to activate upon reawakening. Which meant, they're tracking us, Harven muttered. Right now. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a memory vault. It was a damn beacon. He stood up fast. We need to move. Now. The other children looked up, startled. Kira moved to Tovin's side, wrapping an arm protectively around him. It's not his fault, she said, voice low but firm. I know, Harven said quickly. But that doesn't matter to the ones coming. He dug into his satchel, pulling out a sterilizer and a microblade. The tag could be removed if he had time. But he didn't. Not here. The scanner pulsed again. Ping, ping, faster now. They had minutes. Maybe less. The first shot didn't come with a warning. It cracked through the chamber's ceiling like lightning, vaporizing part of the crystal arch just inches above Harven's head. He dove instinctively, yanking Tovin down with him as the others scattered. Shards of glowing crystal rained across the floor, sizzling where they landed. The second shot followed instantly, precise, measured, not meant to kill, but to flush them into the open. Move, Harven barked, eyes scanning for an exit. A secondary corridor opened to their left, narrow and unlit. He herded the children toward it, keeping low, shielding Tovin as best he could. Behind them, mechanized footsteps echoed, steady synced. Not drones. Worse. Echo Division. Harven recognized the sound of their exosuits, those gleaming, bone-white alloys designed for surgical war. The AI-controlled units weren't just machines. They were hybrids, blending algorithmic logic with the cold efficiency of combat protocols learned from 100 Terran campaigns. And now they were here, hunting children. As they ran, a projected voice filtered down the tunnel behind them. Calm, clip devoid of emotion. Return the tag bioform. You have 60 seconds to comply. Lethal suppression authorized. Harven ground his teeth. They already know exactly which one. That meant they'd locked onto Tovin's phase marker. No jamming would work now, not unless he cut it out. They reached the end of the tunnel and spilled into a circular chamber, dimly lit by glowing glyphs that shimmered as the children passed. Harven raised his talon edge, now fully active, its blade humming with kinetic tension. The first Echo unit entered with precision, tall, faceless, wielding an arc spear that flickered blue with charge. It didn't hesitate. Neither did Harven. He lunged forward, slashing low, using the blade's momentum to deflect the spear just enough to avoid a fatal strike. The impact shook through his arm, nearly dislocating his shoulder, but the Echo staggered back. Behind it, two more entered, flanking. Kira raised her hands, and the glyphs on the wall pulsed in unison. A shockwave rippled through the chamber, brief, invisible, but enough to send the second Echo unit into a half-second stutter. Harven took the opening. He drove the talon edge upward, piercing the neck joint of the first Echo unit. Sparks burst from its chest as it collapsed, twitching, limbs seizing. Back, he shouted, retreating toward the far archway. We can't win this fight. Mirren dragged Luma behind her while Sitha covered the rear, his hands glowing faintly with resonance energy, crackling at his fingertips like static. One of the Echo units fired a suppression charge, non-lethal, concussive. The blast hit Harven square in the back, throwing him forward. He landed hard, coughing, ribs screaming. Tovin turned back, his face twisted with something beyond fear, determination. Before Harven could stop him, the boy raised both hands and screamed. Not a cry of pain. A resonant burst. The chamber shook. Glyphs flared. The walls themselves reacted, amplifying the sound, reflecting it back. One Echo unit short-circuited, its legs locking before it crumpled. The other staggered long enough for Kira to pull Harven to his feet. We have to go, she yelled, already guiding him into the next passage. They fled down the narrowing tunnel, their shadows dancing wildly behind them in the flickering violet light. Behind them, Echo Division regrouped. And from somewhere deeper in the comms relay, another voice stirred. A transmission barely audible, laced with code and command. Target confirmed. Prepare Ariscale for deployment. They didn't stop running until the passage narrowed into a low crawl space barely high enough to stand. Harven's breath came in ragged bursts, each inhale laced with pain. The blast had done more than knock the wind out of him. It had cracked something. Rib, maybe two. He leaned against the wall, one hand pressed to his side, fingers coming away slick with blood. Damn it. The children gathered around him, their eyes wide. Not panicked, but deeply worried. Mirren hovered protectively over Luma, while Kira kept her gaze on the tunnel behind them, scanning for movement. Sitha knelt beside Harven, reaching for the satchel to find a med patch. But Luma pushed forward. The smallest of them, barely up to Harven's waist, moved with a strange calm. She didn't speak, didn't hesitate. Her small hands touched his ribs, one on each side. Her eyes fluttered closed. Luma, Kira started, but stopped when she saw the light. A faint glow spread from Luma's fingertips, a warm amber hue that sank into Harven's skin. Not a projection, not tech, something organic, cellular. He felt it immediately, like heat moving under the surface, soothing the torn muscle, stitching something broken. He gasped, eyes wide. Bones realigned. Tissue tightened. Pain dissolved. In less than 10 seconds, the bleeding stopped. Luma opened her eyes again. There was no smile. No sign of strain. Only a quiet stillness, as if she had simply done what needed doing. Harven stared at her in disbelief. Ow! She doesn't remember how, Seetha said quietly. But she's done it before. Harven reached up, brushing the edge of his shirt where the blood had dried but the wound was gone. He looked at the child, this tiny being who had just undone what a military-grade concussion blast had inflicted, and felt something shift in his chest. Not guilt, not awe, something deeper. Hope. And in that quiet space, deep beneath a dying planet's crust, Harven realized the truth. These children weren't remnants of the past. They were its rebirth. Tension had a sound. In the silence of the cavern, just beyond the collapsed battle site, it buzzed, low and electric between them all. They were safe for the moment. The echo units had been stalled, confused by the resonance burst and the shifting pathways of the lower tunnels. But Harven knew it wouldn't last. And yet, instead of planning their next move, the group had gone still. All eyes were on Toven. Harven stood with his back against the rock wall, watching as Seetha paced like a trapped animal, his normally calm presence agitated, charged. He led them to us, Seetha snapped. Every time we stop moving, they find us. Every time. Toven didn't respond. He sat on a rock near the edge of the chamber, his hands folded, head down, the faint trace of the phase marker still glowing beneath his shirt. He didn't mean to, Kira said, her voice strained. The tag was placed before he was even born. Before any of us woke. That doesn't matter now, Seetha shot back. We almost died because of it. Harven stepped between them. Enough. The word echoed through the hollow space like a warning shot. They planted something in him. Harven continued, more measured now. You want someone to blame? Blame the ones who built that device, not the boy forced to carry it. But Seetha's glare didn't soften. We all carry something, he said. But only one of us is being followed like a signal fire. Toven finally looked up. His eyes were wet, but his jaw clenched tight. Then leave me. No one moved. Send me out there, he said. Let them take me. Maybe they'll stop hunting the rest of you. You think they'll stop? Harven asked, voice low. That's not how this works, kid. You're just the start. They don't want one of you. They want all of you. Silence followed. Mirren reached for Toven's hand, but he flinched away. Don't, he whispered. You don't know what it's like, feeling it inside you, hearing the static at night. Like someone's breathing through your skin. Kira crouched beside him. We do know. Maybe not the same way, but we've all been marked. Every one of us. Harven watched as her hand found his shoulder. Toven didn't pull away this time. Still, the damage was done. The fracture had formed. A tiny crack in the trust that had held them together since the pod opened. Maybe it would heal. Maybe it wouldn't. And in Harven's gut, an old voice stirred. The soldier's instinct he could never quite kill. Divide them. Break their unity. Turn them on each other. It was what Echo Division had always done best. And maybe, just maybe, it had already begun. They didn't speak much after that. Toven had gone quiet again, curled near the far wall of the chamber, his back to the group. Kira sat beside him in silence, her presence gentle but firm. The others were spread across the space, all of them pretending to rest, but none of them truly relaxed. The air was too heavy, the tension too thick. Harven stood alone near the entrance, eyes fixed on the faint light pulsing from the tunnel they'd just escaped through. He could feel them out there. Not just drones. Units. Commanders. Echo Division wasn't searching anymore. They were closing in. He tapped his worn wrist console, watching the signal pings cluster. Too fast. Too focused. The time had run out. He turned, gaze moving across the children. Kira's head lifted first. Her eyes met his, and he could tell. She knew what he was about to do before he spoke. You have to go, Harven said, voice low and steady. Now. Seetha frowned. We just got here. If we keep moving. There's no more moving, Harven cut in. They've triangulated us. We stay, we die. All of us. A beat of silence. Then Mirren asked, what are you going to do? I'm going to give them something else to chase. Kira stood. No. It's the only way, Harven said. He didn't shout. He didn't plead. He simply told the truth. They're tracking heat, movement, biometric spikes, residual resonance. I've got enough gear and enough anger to light up every sensor within 5 clicks. You head south, toward Lorth's Hollow. Stay underground. Stay quiet. Toven stood now too, his expression unreadable. You won't make it. Maybe not, Harven said, strapping his talon edge to his back. But you might. Kira stepped closer. You can't trade your life for ours. That's not what the Lorathari would have wanted. I'm not doing it for them, Harven replied. I'm doing it for you. Because you didn't ask for this war. And because I started it. He placed a hand on Kira's shoulder, gentle, steady. You want to honor what came before? Then survive what comes next. For a moment, no one moved. Then Luma, the smallest, crossed the space and wrapped her arms around his leg. You came back for us, she whispered. Harven knelt beside her, hugged her close. I never left. He stood, shoulders squared, eyes sharper than they had been in years. Go. Kira led them into the shadows, one by one, disappearing into the lower tunnels. Harven watched until the last of them vanished, until the final echo of their footsteps was swallowed by the stone. Then he turned toward the surface tunnel, where the drones would come first and Echo Division after that. He cracked his neck once. All right, bastards, he muttered, powering up the old CTD flare beacon clipped to his belt. Let's see if I still know how to make an entrance. The flare beacon blazed like a dying star in the ash-dark sky of Dryad 6. Harven stood atop a fractured ridge, wind slicing through the exposed gaps of his armor. Behind him, the entrance to the lower tunnels lay hidden, sealed by a triggered collapse he'd rigged years ago in case of a cave-in or an ambush. Now it served a different purpose. A final barricade between him and the only 5 lives left that mattered. His fingers clenched around the hilt of the Talon edge, its core humming low like an animal waking. It was old tech, part Terran steel, part scavenged Lorathari alloy, and it vibrated with the weight of too many kills. Harven whispered something to it under his breath, not a command, but a promise. Just one more run. Then they came. The first wave was drones, 3, sleek and fast, slicing through the dark like knives of glass. Harven didn't flinch. He triggered the sonic mines planted beneath the ridge. The ground erupted. One drone spun out, crashing into a pillar of rock. Another dodged, but clipped its wing on a shrapnel burst and spiraled down hard. The third veered back, only to meet the edge of Harven's blade as he launched forward. He moved like someone who had nothing left to save. Talon edge cut through the drone's frame with a screech of scorched alloy. Sparks burst around him. The drone dropped. Harven didn't watch it fall. The real threat was just arriving. Echo Division. 4 full tactical units, gleaming white armor streaked with black Lorathari etchings, repurposed from the bodies of the dead. Their visors glowed cold blue, scanning, calculating. Target acquired, one announced in perfect detached Terran. Harven fired first. The pulse rifle slammed into the lead unit's chest, staggering it but not piercing. Harven shifted his stance, switching to EMP darts. He fired 2. One landed on a unit's leg joint, slowing it long enough for him to dash forward. Close quarters, where old soldiers did their best work. He ducked under a spear thrust, rolled behind the nearest Echo, and drove Talon edge into the gap between shoulder plates. The blade buzzed, superheated, slicing deep into the interface core. The Echo spasmed and dropped. 3 left. 1 flanked. Another launched a tether hook. Harven dodged, barely, and returned fire. The tether missed, but the flanker's arc blade grazed his thigh, burning through armor and into flesh. He grunted, stumbling. Pain sharpened his focus. He slammed a concussive charge into the rock at his feet. The detonation knocked both Echo units back. Only for seconds, but enough. Harven limped behind a broken support strut, panting. His vision blurred. His side throbbed. Blood was seeping again. His own breath rasped inside the helmet. Then a voice filtered through the comlink. You're a relic, Strada. The voice was colder than the AI units. It was human. Mostly. Eriskale, the commander of Echo Division. A fusion of soldier and machine. CTD's last, perfect prototype. I remember you, Harven said out loud. Virion Belt. You left your squad to burn while you uplinked to evac. Then lied about it. Kale's voice didn't waver. History judges only the victors. Another burst of plasma lanced overhead. Harven rolled. Fire missed. He was running out of time and ammo. Kale stepped into view now, taller than the others, his armor laced with black veins of pulse tissue. His eyes weren't visible. Only the glow of the data streams across his helmet. You can't win this, Kale said, drawing a twin-blade arc saber. You know that. Harven raised his Talon edge. I'm not here to win, he growled. I'm here to stall. Kale lunged. The clash was brutal. Sparks screamed from metal against metal. Harven parried, twisted, countered, but Kale was faster. Smarter. Enhanced beyond natural limits. Every move Harven made, Kale anticipated. But Harven didn't need to win. He just needed time. He fought dirty, blinding dust kicks, short bursts of flame, echo grenades designed to overload sensors. Each tactic earned him a few more seconds, a few more breaths. Kale struck again, deep this time. Harven dropped to one knee, blade shaking in his grip. "You're done," Kale said, raising the saber. Harven smiled through blood. "Not yet." Then the ridge behind him pulsed. A sound like wind and thunder and thought rippled through the air. Kale paused, looked up. Something was coming. Something old. Something alive. Harven used the moment. One final throw, his last EMP spike, direct to Kale's chest. The shock knocked the commander back. Just enough. Harven collapsed, breath shallow, staring at the rift line beyond. It was glowing again, and somewhere beneath his battered armor, hope sparked one more time. Harven couldn't see clearly anymore. The edges of his vision had narrowed into a tunnel of flickering light and shadow, every breath a battle, every movement a risk. The talon edge had fallen from his grip, buried halfway in the dust beside his leg. He couldn't reach it, couldn't feel his fingers. Kale was still moving. The Echo commander staggered from the EMP blast, circuits flashing wildly across his chest plate as his systems recalibrated. He wasn't down, just disrupted. And Harven knew once the reboot finished, he wouldn't get a second chance. He tried to sit up, to crawl, to grab anything, but his limbs wouldn't obey. A hiss echoed in the air. Not mechanical. Soft. Breathing. Harven blinked, thinking it was his mind playing tricks. But then a silhouette stepped into view from behind the smoke and static haze. Kira. She was alone. Her silhouette small against the chaos, hair catching the dim violet light, bleeding from the ridge behind her. She moved toward him, not running, not panicked, just certain. "What are you doing?" Harven rasped. "You were supposed to run." She knelt beside him, placing one hand over his chest. "You weren't supposed to die here." Behind her, Kale recovered. He raised his saber again, but paused as his sensors lit up. The ground beneath them was changing, vibrating. A tone began to rise. Subsonic. Ancient. It wasn't from Kale's systems. It wasn't from any Terran tech. It came from Kira, and yet, not quite. Something lingered. Something left unsaid. The wind stilled. Not stopped, just softened like the planet itself was holding its breath. Harven stood alone on the ridge, his gaze still fixed on the sky where the rift had disappeared. He didn't expect anything more. No sign, no miracle, just silence. And maybe, in time, that would be enough. But then something stirred. Not in the sky, not on the earth. In him, a pressure behind his eyes, a warmth at the base of his skull. Gentle, familiar. The sensation of being watched, but without threat. It was like a memory leaning too close. A presence that asked nothing, demanded nothing, only waited. Then, without sound, without language, the words formed in his mind. "We will return when you're ready." Harven didn't move, didn't blink. The message didn't feel like sound or thought. It was deeper than either. A resonance, not from outside, but from within. As if the echo of something ancient had been left in his bones, waiting for this very moment to awaken. He felt no fear, only understanding. The Riftborn hadn't abandoned this world. They hadn't fled. They had chosen. Chosen a time, a direction, a future beyond this broken horizon. And in that future, they still carried him with them. Not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as something worth remembering. Harven placed a hand over his chest, over the spot where Luma had once healed him. The skin was whole, but beneath it, something else had changed, something permanent. The voice didn't return. It didn't need to. The message was enough. They weren't gone forever. They were giving him time. Time to become the man they believed he could be. The sun on Dryad 6 had never been kind. It crept low across the sky now, filtered through the swirling ash that never truly settled. The ridge where Harven stood was quiet. Too quiet for a battlefield, too scarred for peace. And yet, there was something different in the silence. Not emptiness, stillness. Harven moved slowly, muscles stiff, breathing shallow. The weight of what had passed lingered in every joint, every step. But he was walking, and that in itself felt like a choice. He made his way down the slope, toward a small outcropping half buried in rubble. It had once been part of a Lorithari observation post. Long before the war, before the CTD had claimed the planet and rewritten its story. Now it was just stone and dust. But Harven remembered what lay beneath. He knelt, brushing aside debris with his palm. Beneath the rock was a compartment, sealed but familiar. He had seen one like it decades ago, during the Vexus campaign. A ceremonial box, carved with spirals and glowing threads that had long since faded. He opened it. Inside, untouched by time or war, was a mask. Lorithari, elegant, delicate, made of woven crystal and organic fiber, shaped not to hide the face, but to reveal the soul beneath. Harven lifted it with care, running his fingers along the contours. The eyes were wide, open, unafraid. The mouth bore no grimace, no snarl, just the faintest suggestion of a smile. He sat back and stared at it, the mask resting in his hands like an answer to a question he hadn't dared ask. The face of those he once feared. The face of the children he had protected. The face of who he might yet become. For a long time, he said nothing, thought nothing, just breathed. Then, slowly, Harven Strade did something he hadn't done in years. He smiled back. And so, in the silence left behind by the rift, only echoes remain. Harven Strade, soldier, guardian, reluctant father, had stood against the very forces he once served. What began as a mission ended as a transformation. Not just for him, but for all of us. The children of the rift are gone, but their memory, their spark, lingers. Somewhere out there in the folds of space and time, they wait. And perhaps, one day, when we are ready, they will return. Because stories like these don't truly end. They just become part of us. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs a journey like this, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next tale among the stars. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.